Is this working now? Can you hear me? They can't hear me? Is this working? Is it? Okay. Is this working? It's supposed to be on. It's not working? It's going to be in that, yeah. So, yeah, if you got it one, yeah. I got the same issue. Well, these are the people who don't care about the Super Bowl, I guess. You know, I wonder if I can change the volume on this at all. Well, it's on, but people can't hear very well. Let me ask.
I just went out and ordered these. I can't fix this out.
Oh, no, this is fine. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I've got a cold. I got a cold. I'm trying to not shake. Hey, Bob, is there a way I can turn this on a little louder? It's
That's
on.
not a volume thing.
No, I know it's not a volume. It's on and off, but it's not. How do you turn the volume up?
Not there, back here.
Yeah, because you can't hear. It's not coming out the speakers much.
You were sitting over here this morning, right?
Yeah.
Yours.
I didn't have this till 5 minutes ago. They just gave me this thing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not working now. Whoops.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2. Okay.
I just needed to have it closer in my mouth. Is it a right-handed or a left-handed one?
Looks like it's a right ear.
Boom.
I will make sure the volume
Yeah,
is
it's
what we need.
good. Okay, good.
It'll make you look good.
Oh, it takes more than that. Is somebody here? No. Can I go grab? You're doing the introduction, aren't you? Okay. Oh. Well, I can hand you this thing if you want. It does work. What's that? You have to take away the food first. Yeah. Tell them to bring the food in here. Pardon? Blame somebody else. I didn't do anything with that. Yeah, they are. They're great, aren't they? She said 80 some inches. I didn't know they made them like that. That's great. I want to get one for home. Hey, how are you?
Okay, this year the education... Mic's not working? Okay, well that's a good start.
I think it is. I think you just have to speak right into it.
I'm trying not to catch Jimmy's cold. So, we're going to begin in a second here. Closer. Okay, I have to catch his cold. Hello, thank you for coming. This year the Education Committee thought we would try This year, the Education Committee thought we would try a few different formats, and one of the formats was getting to know the experts in our midst, and there are lots of them. I know many of you have talents, hobbies, or careers that put you in a position to explain complex issues. We are very fortunate to be starting off today. JB is a well-known expert all around the country, and we have him here for our very own to explain what's going on with healthcare. I don't think there's a more complex problem that we face as a society than healthcare, and I think that we're getting further from the solution, not closer to it. Although I heard Bernie Sanders propose that we take all the ICE funding and put it toward the Medicare. And but it would solve at least one problem we've got. So please give JB your cooperation. He is very kind to do this as the first person to try to put this together and make it happen. We know the transition after mass is hard, but we think it's worth it because you're already here, so we hope that you would stay and learn more. I think becoming an informed voter is very important right now, given all the strange things happening in our country. So please give me your attention, and I really thank you for being here. The next program, which I would encourage you to try to bring a friend, is on immigration. On March 1st, we have a judge who was an immigration judge who was fired recently by Trump, and she's got some very strong things to say about what's going on and how it could be improved. So I know that's a month away, and I can't help that, but I think that we're in a good position to learn from both of these presentations. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. With this outfit, they wanted me to be the halftime person instead of Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl, but I turned him down. I told him. So this little microphone I think is going to be a problem. But if you need to hear, if I'm not speaking loud enough, just give me the ear and I'll try to crank it up a little bit. More? Oh no. Blame Clues. He was supposed to do this. He was supposed to do the mic. Bob, higher. Anyway, I also need it because I managed to come down with a cold this week, so my throat's not in great shape. But together, I think we can work it through. Is the other one working? You getting it? Oh. Okay. Well, we're working we got the kid with the ponytail in the back trying to get the AV to work right, so we'll get it going in a few minutes. You're going to be the tech guy? Yeah, but now, I have big ears, so I can't.
We're going to bend it. You do have big ears.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that confirmation.
Jeez,
Is that better?
that just doesn't want to stay there. That doesn't want to stay. Here, wait a second. We're going to do this.
You know, the option is I can just hold it. That's the other.
No, we're not going to do that. There. How's that?
Okay, is this better? Okay, well, I hope I won't swallow it while I'm at it. I mean, we'll see how it works. Hopefully, I can keep this to a reasonably short period of time, and we can have a lot of Q&A. If there are any questions you have in the meantime, just raise your hand, clarification, or whatever. But actually, I don't have much choice because Barb Belovich gave me a whole list of assignments. And since she's large and in charge, I had to do what she told me. So this is what she told me I have to do. I got to cover all this stuff. So I will do that, and then I will talk about whatever else I want to talk about, which 2 or 3 of you told me, please don't make it a graduate course. It's way beyond what we want to do, so I'll try to minimize that a little bit more. But we can pick up other things as we go along elsewhere. So this is the list that Barb gave me. So let me quickly dispense with these. Whoops. Oh my. I didn't even plan that. That's amazing. So first of all, what do these terms mean? I'm going to assume that judging by the amount of gray hair in this room, that most of you sort of know what Medicare is. And we can talk about that further. One of my side events was being on the board that advises Congress on payment rates for Medicare. So I spent a lot of time getting to know it very well. And since I retired last year, I waited until I was 81 years old to retire, but I retired last year. I'm actually experiencing it firsthand. So in my first year of Medicare coverage, I've managed to blow completely through the budget for Anthem that they had planned for me. They get about $12,000, $15,000 a year for me. I think I spent $100,000 in the first year. So that's standard. That's sort of the way it works. Anyway, Medicare was the first major thing that the federal government did, and it was a benchmark. It basically was copying Blue Cross. So we'll have to go back and think a little bit about what Blue Cross was, but they just basically ran Blue Cross for older people for one big reason, because the elderly were basically uninsurable. And I want to come back and visit that a little bit later, because that's the standard issue that we have to worry about as well. Medicaid programs were inherited because the states had programs for poor people, but very uneven. So this was one that they allowed, they increased, but they made it a state-driven program. So unlike Medicare, Medicaid is run by states, and therefore it has lots of variations, differences in coverage, all sorts of things that are involved, which lead to a lot of inequities, to put it mildly, in terms of what happens. But fundamentally, if you're below a certain poverty level, you're 100% covered, almost, not quite. That's important. There are a bunch of other ones that are still residual, left over largely from the previous period where we had special programs. Cuyahoga County, when I moved here, John Mannix, the person whose chair my name was named after, was head of Blue Cross. He founded Blue Cross in this area. Wonderful person. He told me that at the time I came in, we had about 35 hospitals in Cuyahoga County. We now have 4 major systems, that's it. But before that, 20 years before, we had 60. Many of them were tuberculosis hospitals, other specialty kinds of things. Those changed over time. The biggest player, the one that we haven't really touched, are self-insured employers. People that, usually plans that have at least 300 people in them, something like that. One of my little side ventures was being CEO of QualChoice Health Plan, the plan that University Hospitals had for a number of years. And so I got very much involved in this whole business as well. This is where the risk is owned by the employer. It looks like you're getting your insurance from Anthem or Medical Mutual, but in fact, you're getting it directly from the company. They're taking the financial risks. That is a historical event that happened because of wage price controls, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Fully insured is largely for small companies, and that's what most people think they've got, but what they really have is self-insured. Small businesses largely having that, and then the individual and self-pay. And this is where the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, came in. It only really dealt with these two, plus 4 other major areas that were part of the bill, of which I spent in some ways are more important than the exchanges. But we'll talk about that a little bit later if you'd like. So I hope you have a lay of the land here. This is what we have to deal with. This is the current status of what it looks like. Why don't we have universal health care? Bernie Sanders told us how to do it, for crying out loud. Why don't we just do it? Medicare for all, right? I actually wrote an op-ed, I think it showed up in the New York Times a few years ago, called How We Get to Medicare for All. And it was basically because of the failure of our current system. So we need to spend time thinking about the current system. But we also need to think about what Medicare really means, what Medicare for All would mean. Why do we not have it? Well, first of all, blame it on Ben Franklin. As good as he was, his famous quote was, when they were developing the Philadelphia General Hospital, the first general hospital in the country, he was quoted as saying, healthcare is too important to be left to the government. He didn't like government very much, I guess, at the time. The second is wage price controls. During World War II, the only way you could compensate people, in addition, because of fixed wages, was to give extra compensation to them in the form of benefits. John was in my office, John Mannix was in my office one time at Case, and he saw a plaque on the wall, and he said, oh, that machine tool company, I dealt with them, with Blue Cross of Ohio. they came to me and said, give us the fattest, biggest benefit package you can possibly come up with, because we need machine tool people and we can't get them. And I want to take them away from everybody else. So that's and then the unions obviously figured it out and it went from there. The biggest I think the biggest problem is political pressure from providers. Doctors, especially the AMA, did not want to have this because they knew that along with coverage came regulation and prices would be controlled. The second largest one were dentists. That's one reason why dental insurance is so small. I spoke to the American Dental Association one time, and I've never met a more conservative political group of people in my life than those dentists. They were amazing. Good people, but really amazing. And U.S. rugged individualism. I actually had that John Wayne down, and I had to change it because I thought it was a little bit too. So why don't we have it? I think it's political largely, but it's historical. And the question then is, are we ever going to get there? So we'll have to wrestle with that a little bit later. Barbara also wanted me to talk about, this is not in particular sequence, but what the federal cuts mean. And this really is a serious issue, I think. The Medicaid enrollments are probably the most serious one in my view, is that we are moving towards restricting access to Medicaid. And during the time when I first got involved and came to Ohio, the whole effort was to try to get more people engaged in Medicaid. In Cuyahoga County, when I was on the board at Metro Health, we tried to get more people engaged in Medicaid. No question why. It was important. And they got much more coverage. The first year of the expansion of Medicaid, we enrolled 30,000 people that would never have been covered, largely because we could use Medicaid. Now we're basically putting up barriers to people to getting Medicaid. That's where those cuts have come from, is cutting people off. And I think that's a serious issue, particularly given the sermon this morning and what we were dealing with, I think. Medicare Advantage programs are going to be nibbled around the edges mostly. How many of you have a Medicare Advantage program with Anthem or somebody? Well, get ready, because I think Silver Sneakers is probably going to be on the block, you know. You get Silver Sneakers because they get an extra payment from the Anthems of the world and others to cover that. It's not free. They get extra payment, and they get extra payment because those plans are required to give away anything over 80%, anything under 80% of their claims, of their premiums. They have to give it away in other benefits. And because their premiums have been pretty good, largely because they figured out how to game the system, to put it bluntly, they're going to have some of that cut back. This first year, the increases are going to be very minimal, if at all. And denials. How many people have not been denied? I'm going through that now with a couple of things, minor, silly, but we have to deal with that. The third one, I think, is places, and this is below the water line, but very important. The states have figured out how to finesse the Medicaid system. And they did it by charging what's called a tax or a franchise fee on top of everything else. Nobody knows this. This is all inside baseball stuff, but it's really important. So you can charge the Anthems and all the other plans a little bit more, that then goes into the Medicaid program and then gets matched by the federal government and then gets fed back in additional coverage. So this is, as my friend Uwe Reinhardt, a famous Princeton economist, used to say, it's like feeding the horses in order to feed the birds. Just think about that a little. This is completely backwards, ad hoc. When I first heard this, I thought, well, the feds are stupid, but they're not that dumb. You know, they're not going to let you get it. Well, 20 years later, it's still going on. That one is probably on the blocks, and it probably, from a gross point of view, is not a bad idea to get rid of it, but we got to replace it with something else. This is going to be a major cut in Medicaid programs, particularly for safety net hospitals, rural hospitals, people that are dependent on Medicaid. I think that's going to be an issue, big one. And now, what people don't understand is that Medicaid, the feds pay reasonably, I think it's a reasonable rate for hospital care, but private payers pay about 30 or 40% more. That's to make up for the shortfall, for the fact that you don't get as much from the federal government, and to do other things that hospitals would like to do. Needless to say, employers don't like this. They think that's a terrible thing to have to pay that much more. But it's not going to go away unless we do something on a broader basis, like universal health care, okay? So this would be a reason to do that, and the reason why big business might someday get behind this, because they don't want to pay that much. Rural hot populations, I don't think there's any obvious thing here. Rural hospitals have been closing for decades. There are half as many hospitals in Texas as there used to be. Well, there are half as many in Ohio as there used to be, largely because people didn't need them anymore. So they just went ahead and moved to elsewhere. That's going to continue, but now it's going to be financial. It's going to be because the cutbacks to Medicaid will hit those rural populations. The limits on the Affordable Care Act exchanges will hit those populations that were small farmers and small businessmen out in the country. That's what they depend on. They've enrolled in the ACA exchanges to a large extent. To the extent that gets cut back or the subsidies get less, they're going to be hurt much more. And I think that's going to be an access issue. The $50 billion bailout is just window dressing. It's not going to make much difference. Very small. And where are the federal subsidies? Here's one that I'm particularly concerned about. I actually wrote an op-ed on this, and I didn't send it out. I've been thinking to do it. The problem with the Affordable Care Act is the Democrats never explained what affordable means. It's sort of an obvious thing. What do you mean by affordable? It's not affordable. Well, they're a very specific definition. The data shows, because I called one of the people that were behind this, a professor at MIT, and asked him, where did you get those numbers? Because right there in the bill, it says at the lowest level, 2%, the subsidies between what the insurance company has to have and what you have to pay as an individual has to be big enough to get it down to the net being 2%. 2% is affordable. As the income level goes up, it goes up to 9.5%. And those are based on real data of disposable income after you paid for housing and food and everything else. That's what you have left over on the average, and that's affordable, okay? Now, that was well thought out, and I was really amazed that Congress actually got to the point of figuring it out. Now, nobody in Congress knew what they were doing, by the way, on this, but the people behind them did, and they came up with a really good rationale for that. Then comes COVID. It's not effective anymore. We do these arbitrary additional subsidies, and now COVID's gone away, and we want to arbitrarily get rid of them all. That does not answer the question, what's affordable now? That's the real question. What's affordable now? And it's not what it was back in the time when this was passed, but it's something that we need to think about on a regular basis. We made a collective decision that affordable for people below the poverty level on Medicaid is zero. They have no money left. So we don't charge them anything for that. Above it, we made it a gradation until they got to the point where they could have jobs, in which case then it's affordable whatever the employer doesn't pay for themselves. We haven't done that. I think that's a big one. So, now, Barbara, did I answer your questions? That's acceptable? Okay, good. That wasn't too bad. In about 15 minutes, we managed to get. Yeah, and we in Ohio we were delayed in expanding Medicaid. So do you have Medicaid, and then did you do expansion under the Affordable Care Act? Those are two steps that are really important to understand. It's not equal. So if you plan on being poverty-stricken, pick your state carefully. Okay, you may go to the wrong state and have trouble. Anything else? Well, let me talk about some of the things that are behind this, because I think the real to use a slogan like Medicare for All isn't good enough. We need more. We need to understand more about what's going on, because this is a very complex area, and there's a lot of missing moving parts here. I want to provide some insight into how Medicare and insurance works in general. I've spent a good chunk of my career worrying about how to pay for things, the key tools and choices. I want to go to the underlying premise, and getting back to why we're here in a religious organization, of what's our social contract? What's driving this? Why do we worry about this collectively? Because I think this is an important issue. Speculate a little bit about how we can get there, and think a little bit about how to get there. Now, I fought for years with my friends farther to the right, even though I'm in a business school, that the competitive market can't take care of everything. This markets don't always work. Now, I thought I'd give you basic economics, and excuse me, you're the one that brought up. What is a market? What is a competitive market? Okay, now there would be a quiz on this, so quickly, think about this. That's what a competitive market. If you talk to your friendly neighborhood economist, he'll say all that stuff there. Well, that's crazy. There's never been a market like that. That's a framework, but it's a useful framework, because when I know there are deviations from that, then I know that's a place where the government has to step in, or an entrepreneur can come in and take over that part of the market, or whatever. But the competitive market doesn't work in healthcare. It just doesn't. And in spite of the fact that many people would like to believe that it doesn't. So inevitably, we're stuck with the government coming in. Ben Franklin, excuse me, but you were wrong, okay? We had to come in. We have to do something with this to deal with. Now, the trouble is how to do that. Let me, again, stay at 30,000 feet here. Think about it. There are two questions that we have to deal with in the broader financial question about healthcare and most other parts, where one is covering the risk of needed care now. The fact is that some of us using a lot of health care, some of us don't use health care. It's a wide variation. And that it takes time, that sometimes I have to make investments now for something later. I have to worry about preventive thing. Sometimes I have to borrow from the future. That I have two different ways. So insurance, when we use the word insurance, we're talking about populations. So a bad event happens. Maybe it happens to this guy, maybe it happens to this woman here, but a bad event happens and it causes something particularly financial. I have to group people across that population in order to finance that one event. That's what insurance is, okay? It's a fundamental notion of what insurance is all about. And part of what healthcare is about is that. That's what John Mannix did when he first set up Blue Cross, is he pooled people together. They all put money in the pot, and then when somebody needed it, the hospital got paid for it. The hospital got paid at a fairly broad rate. The second part, though, and this is a little trickier, is that it takes moving money back and forth in time. When it was me going to my family physician in Charlottesville, Indiana, where an old Doc Scott was there, and he'd sit there and smoke his pipe, ironically, and look at you for 20 minutes and pass a bill. That wasn't a big deal, no big deal. When I have to go to the hospital and get a stent put in my heart, that's a big deal. So I have to worry. And they had to make an investment to build that surgery suite sometime in the past, and so I have financing issues that I have, and I have the same thing as an individual. That I would like to have you have some savings so that you can have it available. So that moving money back and forth through time is an important part of it. Savings accounts, wealth transfer is a key part of that. The other part of it is borrowing. So in order to build that suite, I had to go borrow the money. When I was on the board at MetroHealth, we borrowed $1 billion. I had to swallow really hard to convince the people on Wall Street that, yeah, we can pay that back, I hope, and to build that beautiful new building there. So I've got two parts of this I have to worry about. And I have to worry about the financing and the insurance part of it. We've done both of these. So we've got a trouble with unpredictable high-cost events driving the one, but I've got higher cost, big facilities, chronic care needs, high deductibles, things like that that make me save up for the something or borrow from the future. So I got two dimensions of finance to worry about here in terms of making this thing work. Somebody has to do that. It can be at an individual level, it can be at an employer level, or it can be at the government level. But somebody has to worry about both those dimensions as well. So how well do we can design a system? We have a choice of what to finance and what to borrow. Events that are not predictable, I want to insure them because I put a group together, and that group will deal with that. The key is getting a group to spread that risk. There's a book, I brought some books here, not by an economist, but by a journalist called Against the Gods. I ran into this maybe 15, 20 years ago. It gave me a rationale for how I spent my life, that until we figured out how to spread that risk, that we couldn't do things as society that we could do otherwise. The ship went over the horizon, and if it didn't come back, that was the end. The crop failed. I starved until I had insurance and group mechanisms to handle that. This is a really important sociological thing as well. So sometimes we've done that well. The basics of financing are that we finance events that are known, not the unpredictable ones. I can't predict what's going to happen, but if I can predict it, then I can finance it over multiple periods of time, and I have to match it. So that's a question of financing. That's what the financial institutions are all about. If we do this well, society's better off. No question about that. The stress of not knowing what's going to happen next or not being able to be covered, clearly an important health issue as well as a financial issue. So we really need to think about this from a global point of view, I think, in terms of how to make this go. What have we done with that in healthcare? Well, we've mostly reallocated risk. So the last 20 years or 30 years, we just keep moving risk around. So that's what deductibles and co-payments and all those things that you don't like to deal with are about. Passing risk to the patient so that the patient is more careful about their demand function, but not necessarily doing the right thing for their health. So we've really played with that. The insurance people have played with this to the extent that we haven't done that. We've started paying differently. It used to be that if a hospital had an expense, Blue Cross just paid their portion of that expense, and that was the way it worked. No big deal. Now we pay them on various incentive bases by passing risk to the hospital. The idea being we're trying to get them to be more careful. This is all about cost, about being careful. And that's a reasonable thing to do. But we haven't done it with much finesse, let's put it that way. But most of the time, quite often, patients are left in the middle. And that's where the murder of the HSA, of the United Healthcare executive was basically, I wrote an op-ed that my wife convinced me not to send it out because then I would become a target of some nut out there. Basically saying it's not individuals who are evil, it's a system that creates problems on both sides, that I'm trying to do that. Now along comes the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was really a landmark in many ways. Changed a lot of things. Premium subsidies, limit the shift of taxpayers to employees subsidized. We're changing all this. A lot of variations in how we do that. It was a bad struggle. I got a picture of that too, by the way. This is. Oh, you don't think that's right? That assures that denials, that prior authorizations, high deductibles, those are all weapons of war. Come on, that's what it's all about. And you're stuck in the middle, of course. And on the other hand, not that anyone here who is a provider, of which I see a number of you, would ever do anything not absolutely necessary for the health of the population. But maybe you might do a little bit at the margin, you know. Paul Starr, I tried to find his book, The Social Transformation of American Medicine is a wonderful book, got a Pulitzer Prize for it. Princeton, the sociologist, the first phrase in it is, "The dream of reason did not take power into account." I thought that was one of the best lead-ins I've ever had. Right? It was the best of times and the worst of times. You know, it's just one of those great phrases that when I ask you as an agent to make decisions for me, you're supposed to take them just from my point of view. But when you have that piece of equipment that's sitting there and it could be used, and maybe I can find a little bit more out about whether the patient's flat of the curve medicine is what it's called. You know, I can do just one more test to figure out what I can do. The danger, of course, is then I maybe do more procedures. I do some services that are maybe a little bit lower value. I can play billing games. Instead of one bill, I can put two bills out. You know, nobody would do that, no. And maybe I can even monopolize the thing by consolidating into, let's just say, university hospitals and the Cleveland Clinic? No, they're monopolies, no. Did that have anything to do with those? Of course it did. Because you could bargain better with the Blue Crosses and the Anthems of the world for better fees. So do we have market issues with this? And patients caught in the middle. And that's the problem. The patients are caught in the middle. So let's go to the next one. And then I want to give you some answers to some of these before we wrap up here. What's the social contract behind it? This is it. Oops. Again. Maybe that was a symbol too, right? The argument is that we have a natural tendency to want to help people in need. And I think that's true. I read a book getting ready for this talk, actually. Oh my, what'd I do with it? I left it out. That it argues that how we can get to a healthcare broader thing. We have a need to talk about this, the Good Samaritan, you know, the fact that, but we especially want to deal with people who are close to us. So people that are more distant, the reason why the Good Samaritan was an important parable is he wasn't part of the tribe. That wasn't normal. Normally you would take care of people in your tribe, but he's from a different tribe. So that was the challenge that Jesus had for us, I think. The Good Samaritan, we modify that to focus on people primarily in our tribe. So we have ethnic hospitals that are tied to ethnic groups. When I first came to town, I looked at 3 hospitals in Cleveland that were about to close. One was called Polyclinic. It's now City View up on a nursing home. It was for Eastern European. There was another one called Forest City for black people. There was one in University Circle called Women's Hospital. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Well, as I found out later, those were created because the physicians from that group didn't have privileges at the major hospitals. So they had to create a hospital for those physicians to practice. Same thing with Mount Sinai. The last head of Mount Sinai told me they served 4 kosher meals per day the last year they were there. It wasn't for Jewish people. It was for Jewish doctors that didn't have privileges. So we changed all that. So we did a lot of these things. But the point is, we focus on our tribe. There were morality tests early in hospitals. You had to be worthy to be admitted to the hospital. So the religious person might say that you were okay. Religious affiliation. Why do we have all these named after religious groups? Well, that's because of our tribe, right? So the point is, we have the social contract, but we tend to focus it on narrow, a little bit narrower than we would otherwise. And the way we fulfill that contract, it varies a lot depending on who's making those decisions. Who gets to make decisions? If it's the doctor, if it's the insurance company, if it's an employer, if it's somebody else, and key economic drivers. The fact that the pharmaceutical company has things they want to sell, and they're going to make sure that they can sell them in a way. Political lobbying, no question about that. One of my forever stains in my soul is giving $1,000 to Jimmy DeMora. because when I was running Qual Choice Health Plan, Farrah Walters, the CEO of University Hospitals, they're all long gone, so I can talk about this. She invited us all to her house for a fundraiser for Jimmy DeMora when he was the county commissioner, and suggested that it'd be really nice to bring a $1,000 check with us. So being a good soldier, I did it, even though I knew he was a sleazebag, and it was a terrible thing to do. We were buying access. We met anybody who has dealt with political power knows that you buy access through political contributions. So we got issues with that. That's effective political lobbying. But the fact is that we do these. We still have these underlying things that we do for population. The book I was going to refer you to that I don't have handy here, she makes it a point that we keep doing these things for different groups. And the fact that we do them, that we create mechanisms to take care of these groups, is evidence of a social contract that we want to help people out when they're in need. And I think that's really important. And it goes back to religious reasons for why we do things as well. So, getting there, however, is a real mess. It's just a mess. Now, this is inside information. I didn't think we would ever come up, the Obamacare thing, the ACA, I didn't think it had a prayer of a chance. But I got a picture of the last negotiating session when they hammered it out. It's really amazing. This is, well, you think I'm joking. Well, you can identify them. Now, the sleepy guy there, you know, the ARP, he just, come on, give me my drugs. You have to get rid of that donut hole and that drug plan. You pay for drugs and you don't pay for drugs and you pay for it again. Great, we'll take care of that. How are we gonna do that? Well, get Big Pharma here. Big Pharma, all they wanted, you know it's Pharma because they got 2 forms of medication here. That had to be Big Pharma. They said, okay, we'll help fund that. We'll take care of the old people. We just don't mess with our drug pricing. Okay, now this is where what Trump's done lately is sort of an interesting thing. It's the first challenge to drug pricing that we've had in the country. But it's an obvious thing to worry about because we pay so much more than everybody else. They got what they wanted. The docs, now they got their cards real close to the vest. Docs, all they wanted was to get rid of a thing called the sustainable growth rate formula, which was a mechanism that was put in earlier to try to hold down cost. And every year, they were going to take it away from next year's payment for docs because they spent more than they should have, quote unquote, according to the formula. And then each year, they pulled it. It was like Lucy and Charlie Brown. They pulled the football away at the last minute and said, "Oh, no, we're not going to take it away from you." That was up to 17%. And they said, "Make that sort of Damocles go away." Great, they did it. I was on the board of the Joint Commission accrediting healthcare facilities with the president of the AMA, and she was one of the ones that made that deal, and then she was out of her job the next year. So I don't know how well that worked out. That's the American Hospital Association, the Federation of American Hospitals. Those are for-profit, the general and the for-profit thing. They're leaning away from. They just said, look, just bring us some more business. Just make sure everybody gets insured because we're going to do that for you. They got what they wanted, no problem. Employers, the big ones are out there, and they were with it because they knew they were paying more than anybody else. And they said, okay, if you insure all those other people through this new plan, that'll mean that our rates will go down because they're not have to pass so much on to us. So big business was fine with it. Small business wasn't because they weren't insuring anyway. So we had political problems all over the place. AHIP is America's Health Insurance Plan. They've got, I'll keep hitting that. They've got this ACE down here. They said, come on, we'll do it for you. Just send it people, we'll take care of it and we'll make more money out of this thing. And then Obama was here and he had all the cards. If you've ever looked at this, he's got all aces here. I thought that was interesting. Now, my point being, just saying Medicare for all or saying something else is not good, not helpful, because you got to get all the coalitions together, all the people that have to come to agreement. And each party has something to gain or lose, unless the cost is too high not to do anything. And I think that's an important factor to think about as well. Well, setting premiums, we're going to have to set premiums in most of these plans, unless we go back to the original Blue Cross thing where I just take average and everybody pays the same rate. But once that went away, we had to, now we have a little technical issue here because this is Chicken Little was the first actuary, okay? Now, actuaries are people that have to add up the numbers and say, okay, 40 to 50-year-old, 40 to 40, 45 to 50-year-old male, boom, that's your average cost. That's what I'm going to charge you, plus 10% on top of that. So when we started the ACA, we hired these people to do it for us, and she didn't know what the hell she was doing, frankly, because nobody's ever done this before. This is a population that was uninsured. So for the first 3 years, the Affordable Care Act was flying blind. And it was amazing that it actually came in effectively. So using a competitive framework where the insurance companies had to bid, and then we did that subsidy to get it down to an affordable level. But in order to set the bid, they had to guess at what the expenses were for a population that they'd never insured before. This is a real problem. And they did a pretty good job because they were competing with each other. So the competitive market in this case actually worked pretty well. Premiums were very steady for the first 3 or 4 years of the Affordable Care Act. And then they shot up during Trump's first term because he took away some of the subsidies and he created a huge uncertainty. And then they leveled out again under the next administration, and now God knows where they're going to go, but so far they've been reasonably good. It's just the subsidies that are a problem that we have to deal with. Increased uncertainty. The problem is market failure. And the problem gets to fundamentals. It's why I want to start with the idea of insurance versus financing. That market failure, we write contracts for 1 year. I write your auto contract for this next year and you will crash your car or you will not crash your car. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. When I have health insurance that is about one event, you're going to have a heart attack or you're not going to have a heart attack. When you've got diabetes or COPD or a chronic disease, you have it this year, you're going to have it next year, and you're going to have it the year after that. When you get old, excuse me, because I'm one of you, when you get old, you're going to spend money this year, you're going to spend money next year, and the year after that. That becomes uninsurable, okay? Because I can predict what's going to do. And once I can predict what's going to happen, it's like selling fire insurance to arsonists. It's not a good business model. You're going to go out of business. You can't do that. So what do I do? How do I plan that? And this is a problem, and that's where market failure comes in. For the uninsurable, when I have more and more uninsurable, which is us, old people, then just doing little one-offs, doing the VA, doing disabled, special needs, things for COVID, AIDS, the Children's Health Insurance Program, the one-off deals that we've done to try to meet our social contract and leave the rest of it for the insurance market to work aren't going to work anymore. And that's where failure comes in. And that is the underlying economic reason why we might have a chance to come up with some sort of universal health care. Not because people believe Bernie Sanders, but because the inevitable nature of the market is going to push us that direction even more. I have a French doctor I had a number of years ago. He wrote a paper for me called the 17 Maladies, which I thought was brilliant. That French system carved out 17 different things that were like COPD or diabetes or whatever, took care of them in a separate government-sponsored plan, and left the rest of it. I called him up when we were doing the Affordable Care Act. I said, how is it, what's happened to the French system? He says, well, we still do it, only we're up to 32 maladies now. So everybody wants to get their special malady covered specially, okay? You can see the politics here is an issue. So we're not going to get to Univis until the market fails. And the market may be close to failure in a number of ways, and I think that's an important thing to think about. Rising, we can only do that so many times. A rising Chronic care needs are going to be the biggest one. The fact that we're all getting older, we have needs that happen over multiple periods of time, and then we add into it genetic information. If you have the BRCA gene, pretty good chance you're going to get breast cancer. Okay, we've got issues to deal with that go beyond this, and it's going to force at least more financing by the government, the broadest possible group, and maybe the whole system. But how do we get there? We can't just do it easily. How might it work? Well, Medicare for All has big problems, but mostly because it's uncontrolled utilization, the costs are higher, we got all kinds of issues with provider selection and such. But a basic universal coverage is not. And many other countries have done this. Canada, some of the other places around, cover the major part of the preventive care, normal care, do it without extra cost, finance it through the mechanism that we have in the government, and then let people buy into more advanced care if they would like. That was the advocate of the book that I just read. That I will flag for you when we're done here. The trouble, of course, is if you're in the UK and you have the National Health Service, physicians can practice in the National Health Service and private practice both. And the former, you can't get, you don't have enough capacity. So you're waiting long lines. It's the same issue in Canada. UK has finally said, no, if you're going to be a service doctor, you have to work 40 hours a week. So they manage the capacity on the one hand to make sure that it doesn't collapse, because otherwise it would be an issue, fundamental issue. Ever-present political issues. I want my malady covered. I want my specialty to have special treatment, but I don't care about the rest of you. Okay, that's going to be a fun one. This is the book I've tried. We've Got You Covered is the book that. What did I do with it? Nope, I didn't. I left it. They've argued this, and I think they've done a magnificent job of how to do it. And it's the best framework I've seen in terms of how we might actually get there to make sense out of it. So, the underlying problems, again, that will push it, is that Medicare is going to go broke. I hate to tell you people this, because I argue with my wife about this all the time, but I paid in all those years. I said, no, it's not an insurance mechanism, it's a social transfer. You're just on the dole. The rest of us are on the dole. It's a huge wealth transfer mechanism to finance. I pay in a significant amount of money over a period of time. I think I've got the slide in here in a minute. I may have taken it out. I pay in about $60,000 in payment in my quote Medicare bank account during my working life. I take out about $175,000 in the 10 years that I have post-retirement Medicare. That is not a sustainable plan, okay? And particularly when I have fewer people working and more people on Medicare, you don't have to be heavy math to figure this out. This is not going to work. So that will force the issue. The second one is really interesting because the wealth now resides in the over 65 group. Before Medicare, the over 65 group was the poorest part of society. You got old, you spent down, you went to live with your daughter, usually your daughter, not your son, because he's a ne'er-do-well, and they took care of you until you died, right? And you had no money left, right? Medicare changed that. And so the wealth distribution is completely reversed. Older people have many more resources than they ever had before. So what are we going to do with that? And that's going to be an issue, I think. It's very unevenly distributed. Vouchers is one thing. Just give us the money and let you choose. Well, that goes back to my market basis. Markets don't work. People can't choose very well. But we've done a form of that through the subsidies that vary under the Affordable Care Act. So we do have data that says, well, that form of a variable thing might be a way to make this thing work and still create some incentives for individuals. So that could be part of the thing. The ACA exchanges have worked by making the insurance market a little bit better. But frankly, it's really hard to choose. I created a mechanism for the university people to choose among 3 different plans. And now I face Medicare where I have 50 different plans to choose from. Can I choose as an expert among which plans? No. You know, the market, you can't, it doesn't work that way. So we got a problem. And central to it is still how do we pay providers? Because providers will make decisions based on their own economic interest as well as what it means to make things work. So how do we determine value? What is driving that social contract? I go back to the basics that said we still have to do things because that's the right thing to do. Now, we got to deal with this. There are multiple layers. How do we determine value? Coverage and access, is that all it is? Just have access? Well, I have access, but if it's not very good access, I may not like it very much. Outcomes, do I look at things and pay differently for them? How do I deal with outcomes? Willingness to pay. In the UK, if you want to buy private insurance, you can buy lots of private insurance and go to private hospitals, including the one that a certain local institution created in London. You know, we can do that, but it implies that healthcare is a luxury good. How comfortable are we with the idea that rich people have more access than poor people? That goes back to the fundamental social contract, but it also goes back to taking care of our own people versus those more distant. How do I play with that thing? None of these are sufficient in themselves, because value is a comparative thing. It's better than it was before. It's better than my former generation was. It's better than another country. It's better than what other comparative group? It's in the eye of the beholder. And ultimately, we take care of people because it's the right thing to do. Now, some of you may know this, but Amazon delivered a package to our house about 4 or 5 years ago. That was a child, the child's seat, and I just couldn't pass it up. The kids were playing it, and that my stepdaughter had these, and we are foster parents, so we were helping out, spent a lot of time at our house. And we didn't know this was going to turn out. Well, 4 years later, they're ours, 100% ours. They're our grandchildren now, and they're the most beautiful, wonderful children you could ever imagine. And what is their value, and what will we do to help them? Anything. It doesn't matter. So ultimately, the closest to us that we have, we will do anything for them. The question is, can we broaden that social contract out to a broader group of people? Can I think of other children as my children? Well, we did that. We did the Children's Health Insurance Plan. So we said, okay, kids, fine. Pregnant women, yeah, okay, we'll take care of them, but then when they're not pregnant anymore, we're not going to take care of them anymore. You know, end-stage renal disease, we'll take care of them while their kidneys are failing. Oh, but then if they have an operation and get a new kidney, then we're not going to pay for sustaining medicines afterwards. I mean, really? You know, these are fundamental questions about how far out of our comfort zone are we willing to go. So what's the bottom line? Who are you going to vote for? I mean, what are you going to look for? I would first look for people that look at data rather than anecdotes. The subsidy business the last few weeks has been driving me nuts because all I hear is stories about how so-and-so is going to have to pay so much more. That's not the question. That's a one-off. The question is, what's affordable? How much can people on average afford to spend on certain things? And then let's make it possible for them to get it. So I would first like to think about that as a criterion. Second, I'm getting off the subject here, but really important, campaign finance reform. There's absolutely no question that votes are bought and sold on the basis of this. I don't have it up here, but I have a slide of where the money goes in healthcare. And if you look at big pharma, as much money goes into marketing and as it does in R&D. Political campaign, when I ran a commissioner for the governor of Ohio, when I first got to Ohio, we had people from every sector in it, including nursing homes. Hope there's nobody here from the nursing home industry. everybody collaborated to save a fairly large amount of money in the Medicaid program in Ohio, except the nursing homes, because they played poker with Vern Rife every Friday night in some town in southern Ohio, and they delivered envelopes of cash to the local assemblyman. We bought votes right and left, no question about it. Anyone who says otherwise does not know what they're talking about. Direct-to-consumer advertising. The fact that I can go to my doctor and lobby for something and I'll get it. I did a major series of studies on growth hormone, and we looked at 90% of all the pediatric endocrinologists in the country, got wonderful response rates. But when I added up all the data and looked at it for all the medical reasons why a child should be getting growth hormone, and looked up relative to the parameter of does the parent want it or not, the parent wanted it. The parent demand function was as big as all the medical elements together. It's a consumer item. The parents wanted little Jimmy to get bigger and not get jammed in the locker anymore, you know? And so we got it. Direct-to-consumer advertising is a mistake, fundamental mistake, clinically should not happen, and it does. And provider payment has got to change. We still pay for individual services largely, not completely, but largely. And that creates an incentive to do more. Maybe for the right reason, but it's still. This is the Paul Starr quote that I mentioned earlier. That is important to think about. And finally, the continuum of access that we need to have. I think the Affordable Care Act is a very good first start for that. That it's a beginning to get there in a way that we never had done before. It was a major jump in terms of taking care of the broader population, meaning that, and while at the same time recognizing all the different groups that need to be in a coalition. So, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know, actually. And I don't know who to vote for because I don't find anybody talking about this. My next step is to write a book. I retired, believe it or not, 81. That was a crazy time to retire, but I retired a year earlier than when I told the president as dean, and because I had work to do, and I couldn't get it done while I was still had a job. So the big work is to write a book. So I want to write a book and try to lay out some of this in a framework that policymakers and managers and CEOs and such can actually do something with. Because I think if we think this through, we can get there. We can meet our social contract, and we can do things in a way that we haven't done before. So with that, let me finish my formal content and just open it up for general discussion. Yeah. Oh, Barb, you want to? She's a lead. Let me give her first. Yeah. Yeah. Right. There are three other parts of the Affordable Care Act besides the exchanges. Of that, that's one of them, and they're really important. I think in the broad scheme of things, they can be more important than the exchanges and the Obamacare thing. No. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. There's an argument that way. Two people in Boston have made that argument. Himmelstein and what's her name have written about this extensively for a number of years. They're right in the sense that Medicare, the administrative cost for Medicare is about 5%, sometimes a little less. For Medicare Advantage plans, it's 20%. Because people look at that and say, oh my God, that's terrible. 15%, we could use more in healthcare. That would take care of all this. If you didn't do any administrative work, that's right, but then I would basically be paying for anything anybody wanted to do, and the volume would go through the ceiling. So that's the fundamental problem. We have to do something about the management side to make it work. Now, how much that costs and whether it's done right, but could we save enough from the private insurance market? Absolutely. Is it enough to pay for Medicare for all? Probably not. That's why the book that I just referred to at the end there is really important, because the two people, one's an economist at Stanford, the other one's at MIT, they made the argument that we couldn't do the whole thing, nor would we want to do the whole thing, because then we'd be giving away 17% of the economy. We'd be quickly at 25 or 30% of the economy if we did that. But could we cover the basics and then let people buy into extra care? That's doable. And after reading the book, I was convinced that that kind of financing would be available. Let the insurance company insure things that are insurable, okay? Pay for extra things that somebody might want as a luxury good on top of that, and then finance things that really we have no business paying for individually anyway. Capacity. I wrote a letter to people on the body that advised the Congress on payment rates that I used to sit on, saying, why don't we create something like the Strategic Oil Reserve? We set aside oil in case we have another embargo, and this is all history for you. Why don't we do the same thing like we had for COVID? So instead of expecting hospitals to have respirators and backup capacity and all that, let's create backup capacity and finance it separately through federal grants. We've done that before. After World War II, we had a thing called the Hill-Burton Act, which we had all the GIs coming back, creating families, and hospitals were terrible. We spent a major amount of federal money financing hospital capacity construction. Now, those are mostly all gone. Sometimes you still see cores of them in old hospitals, but that jump-started the industry to get to the capacity we needed for that particular point in time. COVID, to some extent, a few other things, but we need to be a little more finessed about it than just saying, let's just flip it over and it'll take care of itself. I think it's more, when you get to that's why I wanted to spend time with those details. When you understand how people make those decisions, you got to be a little more finessed than that. Yeah.
JD, for many years I worked as a nurse practitioner in the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system. So, and that was a managed care system which did not do very well in this competitive market. Can you tell me, does the concept of managed care have any place in the future of health care in a universal care system?
Well, first of all, that was a terrible label to put on it, that the managed care sort of ruined the whole idea. When I stopped being CEO of an insurance company, I went back to real life. I had to go through 5 years of therapy for all the rejection I got from people that were, kids throwing snowballs at you. Oh, it was just terrible. No, nobody likes their insurance company. Kaiser was unusual because it combined the two. And I think it was a brilliant thing. It came out of, again, this necessity at the time with Henry J. Kaiser doing this in California, and the dam. But it was brilliant in that it got rid of the incentives, but still planned ahead and allowed you to, ironically, the old Kaiser plan that was here in Cleveland was bought by, when they closed it down, it was bought by Mercy, continued as, what do we call it? I forgot. HealthSpan. And then after that closed down, MetroHealth bought it, and now it's CleCare. But the people that are in the CleCare plan, it's administered by Medical Mutual. It's a great plan, by the way. I had it myself for a number of years. They called it, they still called it Kaiser. To them, it was still Kaiser, you know. Kaiser was a brilliant plan. It worked really well. It had a lot of pushback from providers in particular. It was a socialist way of doing healthcare. But it worked, and if you live in California, the quality's great, access is great, everything's fine, and the costs aren't that much. And they learned how to do medical effectiveness and other treatments as well. It's a brilliant plan. It couldn't get over the hurdle in other places like Cleveland and Kansas City and a few others. And so it never got farther, even though it had help from the government, it still didn't go very far. That's a real shame. I joined it because I wanted to see from the inside what it was like when I had the choice. But can we do something different? Absolutely, I think. And crossing that boundary, the big thing was that Kaiser, because it has a 98% renewal rate. When you're in Kaiser, you're there forever. So they can think of multiple years instead of 1 year at a time. And that made all the difference in the world. So they would engage in much more preventive care than you would have in a normal plan. They would make investments in different ways than you would in a normal plan. So all the good stuff that we'd like to have in a healthcare system, but the politics and the economics made it really hard to do. That first slide, why did we wind up where we do now? That's that we're living with history. Failure of the rest of the system might lead us back to that. Could be. Yeah. Oh, back here, I'm sorry.
Question. With the universal health plan, where basic services provided for everybody, and then for those people who can afford it, they can add to that. What happens to those who cannot afford it and still need those extra services?
Well, that's exactly the issue. And you'd have to make sure, again, the book, I got to dig it out, and I'll have it out here for you. I think I left it in my backpack. The UK, for instance, I mentioned, to make sure that you didn't have long queues, they maintained the doctors had to offer a certain amount of services. The hospitals had to offer a certain amount to make sure that that wasn't the case, so that that basic level of care is good care. It's not bad care. But if I want a super fancy room with concierge service, I'd pay more for that. If I want to have access to other kind of quick, I can call my doc now and she'll respond in 24 hours. I pay extra for that. That's concierge, okay? Well, I shouldn't get an ad. It was good service. But should everybody have that service? No, you don't need that. I just want it. It's something I want more. So am I willing to pay for a private doc to do certain things? Am I willing to have a facility that is completely available for me? If I want to pay for that, fine. But your finger's on a very touchy point. How good does basic have to be to make it fair? And I think that's a very legitimate question. Other countries have wrestled with that, and we can learn from them. And it's gone up and down over a period of time. Yeah.
My question is, will something like what we have currently with Medicaid be put into the larger picture of national health care? Do you foresee that?
I think it should be.
Rather than it's kind of separate with state more regulations and all that kind of thing now.
Well, but what we have now is just an artifact of history. It's the way, because the states took care of poor people, not the feds. And poor people didn't vote, and old people did, so we got Medicare at the federal level, and we just incorporated this at the state level, but we had to have state control because some states didn't want to pay the extra money for it and all that. Yes, should definitely be in there. I thought the Affordable Care Act and the subsidies and the exchanges was a way to get there. So ultimately, could we extend it out on the lower end so that just not down to the poverty level, but below the poverty level for Medicaid rather, we'd let them choose their plans as well. Now they do choose their plans, but they don't do it through the exchange the same way. And then we could extend it on the other side and say, we're going to subsidize you up to 9.5% affordability if you want to spend. For the average working, but by the way, to give you the numbers, for the average person employed by a major company, Their cost of healthcare is like 20%, and 9.5%. They pay about a quarter of what it really costs to provide healthcare. Your employer is giving you that extra money in the form of healthcare benefits, which means that if you look at the numbers, total compensation keeps going up. Cash compensation has been relatively level, and the rest of it's getting eaten up by healthcare. Now, if the average worker understood that, they wouldn't be happy at all. But the unions historically like that because that's tax exempt income. I don't have to pay taxes on it. But when it gets to be 20%, you know, when I'm paying $20,000 for my income, and I mean the cost is $20,000 and I'm paying $5,000, looks like a bargain to me. But my employer doesn't like that very much, and so I think employers are really a big player in this at some point. They could potentially change it, but yes, it should be part of one system, and we should create these ramps to let people go from no jobs, poor situation, to self-employed maybe, to small business, to large business, and have a nice ramp so that you don't have these sharp cuts.
So we become one tribe.
Pardon?
We become one tribe.
We could become one tribe, yes. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
God thinks about us that
Yeah.
way.
What I've heard, is it sounding, can you hear it in the back? Okay, okay, better? Okay.
Oh, we got two going. Oh, here.
What we've got, the whole program has been fascinating.
Are you worthy of asking the question? Is this a moral test?
Okay, this better, yeah, I can hear the echo. It's been on a model that has historically been the case. And I wonder what happens now with the current administration and the current Congress, which has stopping vaccinations, has stopped cancer research, has done so many things that are just looking ahead are going to make us a much sicker society. So these plans of having government involvement or continuing the Affordable Care Act, how do we do with this breathtaking change in our outlook, including getting out of WHO so we don't have the global access to data anymore?
Boy, I don't know what to say about that. That gets back to individual political decisions. Personally, I'm aghast. You know, my friends in the medical research that have lost their jobs and the grants that are not there. Fortunately, Congress has mostly reestablished a large number of those, so it's not going to be as big a disruption as what most people thought, I thought at least. And even the vaccination, I think allowing that to be an individual choice, the data seems to show that people are still vaccinating at a reasonably high rate. They're just not, it's not being quite as pushed as hard. I think, you know, they're big cycles, I think. When we see the impact of some of the things that have happened and the rate of measles infections keeps going through the ceiling, people are going to say, no, that wasn't a good idea. Let's go back. You know, so I think there's a pendulum swing that hopefully will wind up in the middle. It's you know, the right thing. Parents still should have some role, obviously, but should I get good advice from my pediatrician? I think I still am. It's just not being helped much by the government at this stage. So, and you know, I keep. What is that stuff I was supposed to inject to help me with COVID? I keep some of that around just in case that works. You know, no, I'm kidding. Yes. Oh, we lost that one. Oh.
Wah, wah, wah,
All
wah.
right, there we go.
I think you already touched on a demographic phenomenon that is, I think, going to be global in the developed countries. The birth rate is dropping, In Japan, it's 0.87. And you need 2.1 for replacement. So there's that factor, but that puts a heavier burden on the increasing age and healthcare needs of an aging population. And so that's the demographic trend. In terms of the economic trends here, in terms of how the federal government should be supporting healthcare, you already touched on the fact that the largest pot of disposable income is actually in the elderly population. And what sort of a moral commitment does that have? The second piece on that is the observation that under the current administration, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, is that we have a regressive income tax. Those that have don't pay into FICA, for example. And so I don't know what your response would be. Should the government morally or ethically be more participative in the support of women, consider the money that are being held by different populations in the United States?
I'm not sure what to say except yes. You know, we clearly have to come up. One, we have to control the expenses because we've gone. I remember when I got started in healthcare, people were moaning because 7% of the GDP is going to healthcare. We just can't keep spending 7%. It's 18% now, quickly on its way to 20. And, you know, we still have the same argument. We can't, to the extent that we're still getting good value out of it, which goes back to your point, Barbara, then I don't care. You know, it's a social good, and as I need it, I want it to be there. But I do need to finance it the right way. And treating it as a random, unpredictable thing that I can deal with the insurance mechanism won't cut it. It just won't work. So that's why I've written twice now, I've written articles called the Failure of Health Insurance or something like that. And I never published them because I didn't think I had it quite right. But I think that's fundamentally what's going to happen is we'll find out that we just can't keep doing it the way we've been doing it. It's just not going to work. The first precursor will be Medicare, the funding of Medicare. The Medicare Trust Fund will be out, quote, out of money. Well, there's nothing in it to begin with. It's all U.S. government bonds, you know. So there's not a pot of money out there. It's in and out. But that will continue. I want to have more and more immigrants come to the United States and pay Medicare taxes so that they can keep me in the style to which I've become accustomed. Come on, bring it on, bring it on.
Well, the other piece on that, in 2035, it's now the beginning of a 25% cut in Social Security, but then Medicare benefits, I can't predict this yet, it's impossible. What Medicare benefits under the current model will be reduced in a very short time period. And this will affect our adult children, our grandchildren, and so on in terms of access to these populations as they age, with a smaller taxpayer base as the whole population is aging.
Yeah. Well, one of the really bright things about the original Medicare program was they set it up looking like an insurance plan. So people are paying money in, and then they take it out, and it's an in and out thing, and it's the working population versus the retired population. So he got huge buy-in from that. If they had ever if they'd done it as a wealth transfer tax, so social transfer, it would never work. You know, people wouldn't have gone for that. No, I'm not going to pay that. That's not going to do that. So, but effectively, we're up against that limit. We can't play that silly game of we're funding things now in order to pay it later. That transfer. We're not doing that. We're paying money in now so that we can pay it out right now to the people that are using the Medicare. So and that's out of bounds. It's not going to continue. So we can keep playing games and tack a little bit more on, but we probably will have to come back and someday say, we're going to think about the fundamental funding of it and maybe do a value-added tax like you have in other parts of the world. do a wealth tax on some part, would help deal with that big population with extra money out there. The tax when you die, you know, that's a perfectly legitimate place to take money away from people that have benefited from it. And people aren't willing to talk about that now. It'll take a crisis for that to happen. But when the crisis occurs, we're going to have to go out and figure out how to make it work. And I think that will not be that far away. I think in the next 10 years, we're going to have to deal with that one. But we'll all be dead then, so it's okay. No, don't. Oh, somebody? Oh.
Okay, switch, the old switcheroo. I was wondering if you could speak to private equity firms gobbling up hospitals and dialysis centers. At least I've heard this through watching news programs, and I've been horrified. And they seem to say the outcomes are terrible, but I wonder, you know, what can we do about this, and is this even legal?
Oh boy. Well, you know, I teach, for years I taught corporate finance as well, and private equity is just an extension of pools of wealth going out and buying opportunities and making something up. And, you know, the invisible hand of the economy, they've been useful. They've gone after things that have not been performing very well and gone past that. But your point's well taken that in some places they clearly have exploited, I think. And I wouldn't say it's private equity per se. The difference with private equity is it's a quick in and out, a 3-year, 4-year in and out. That's the problem. If I've got Hospital Corporation of America making a 10-year, 20, 30-year commitment, that's one thing. I've got Eli Lilly making investments in drugs that are going to pay off for a period of time. That's private equity. That's private investment. But if I've got Cerberus or somebody going in and throwing money at somebody, loading the hospital up with lots of debt, and then selling out parts of it, taking their money out, and leaving a shell, that's not good. You know, and that's what we've happened. The hospitals down in a little bit farther south from here that went bankrupt. Even the number of places where this has happened. That kind of exploitative behavior is not good. On the other hand, I was in the, did I do that? You know, if I could be Bag Bunny, if I could work on this. I guess it's this thing here. I'll hold it. I was on the board of the CDC here. Now, what in the world is making that noise? Okay, we'll stand completely still. I was on the board of the Dialysis Center of Cleveland, CDC, for 15 years. Maybe it doesn't like what I'm talking about. Is that Bob Close is doing this? That's what and our biggest competitor is the third or fourth largest dialysis operation in the country. The top two were DaVita and a couple others that were basically in the dialysis business. When I looked at the care patterns of those versus what we were doing, they were different. And I didn't think that was particularly good. Plus, they were charging huge amounts of money up front in the first period of time and then relying on government payment later. That was exploitive as far as I'm concerned. So I thought for some of the specialty care things, the private equity people, private investors have done what you would expect them to do. They've tried to make money out of it for their stockholders, but that's, what in the world? On the other hand, I've been following closely the SumaCare, the Suma operation down in Akron. I was on the board of SumaCare for, 10 years or more probably, and so I know them really well. And I know that, what in the world? Maybe, is that a end? Maybe God is telling me that I shouldn't go down that path. I knew the principals involved. The one principal had been there for a number of years, Doc at SUMA. The other one was a fellow that had been an heir apparent at the Cleveland Clinic, went to run Intermountain Healthcare, brilliant place. Then he went off and started doing investment things with a fund. They set up a separate fund to come in and buy SUMA Care. This is really, by SUMA, a health system in Akron, with major limits on how that gets played out. And with the principle involved that they were going to use that facility as I call it a test kitchen for the things that they had invested in otherwise, so you could accelerate the care in ways that you couldn't do if you're just selling it to them as a customer. And they created a $400 million community foundation as well. It's called Trail Path, something like that, Pathways, that will do the kind. Now, that model I thought was really meaningful, and I had to argue publicly about this. This was not just private equity coming in and ripping us off. They're making investments for the long term. So if we can get private investors to put money into places that it really makes a difference and lock them in for a longer period of time, it's the time horizon that bothers me more than anything. And the ability to rip off money, pay yourself off, and then leave the shell behind. That really is a problem, I think. And so I don't have an easy solution for that one, though, because it's part of our private investment system. And we'd have to change a whole lot of other things if we try to change that one. But it's a good question. Are we close to the end? Yeah, I think we are, actually.
I was going to ask about. I was going to ask you what I want to know what you think about the emergency room being added at the Cleveland Clinic when we've already got a superior facility, and there used to be something called certificate of need, right? Were you on that? I served on that as well, where you had to justify that you needed the additional equipment or the additional facility and plan for the whole community. Right now we've got a competitive race, an arms race that's just driving everything up. Thank you so much, JD. This is an amazing time. I really deserve a big hand of applause, especially for going first. That's so disappointing. I wish
I can't believe you're all here instead of watching the Olympics or the Super Bowl advance party here. But so I appreciate it. It's been fun.